Good morning to you. Trust the weekend was fine. Trust your past week was good. Well, this is Sunday, which means it's the beginning of a brand new week. And we're hoping that with some elucidation, we greet you and bring clarity to a couple of the issues that's confronting you that we talk about every day.
Thank you very much. And our first guest this morning that we have on the phone, thanks very much, Mr. Wayne Sturge, for agreeing to come on the program at very short notice. And we're discussing with Mr. Sturge this morning the whole issue of children and guns generally. Mr. Bishop, can you...
Yes, we have a number of things going on here. It is amazing when we look at Mr. Sturge. Let us first of all say thank you so much for joining us. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Rennie. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you here. When we look at what is going on with the number of guns in Trinidad and Tobago, the demand from the police commissioner to get rid of some of these guns, it's not happening. He pre-mandated a number of precincts to get in at least 100 guns for this year. Most of the murders, homicides we are looking at are in fact done via the use of handguns. Then we have kids that we see posted on the internet with guns. That is high irresponsibility, as we all would agree, but more importantly is this tragedy we had in the hills of Diego Martin, where we had some young kids playing, come into contact with a shotgun that was put aside, and unfortunately one of them died. I want you to talk first of all on the responsibility that's placed on the owner of a legal firearm, even though the police are saying this one was illegally gotten with good intent but bad results. But speak to us about the responsibility of gun owners in the first instance. If you have a gun, how are you supposed to secure it?
Well, if indoors, you're supposed to keep it in a vault. You're supposed to keep it away from anyone who's not a licensed firearm user. In fact, if you're a licensed firearm user, you're licensed to carry a specific weapon that is entered on your firearm user's license. So you in essence keep it to yourself, even if your wife or your brother or something is a licensed firearm owner, they ought not to have possession of your firearm. So it's kept in a vault at your house, usually before you get the FUL, the firearm user's license. The police would come to your house to inspect to see where it is going to be kept. Mm-hmm. If you are going outdoors with your firearm, it must be kept on your person. You can keep it in your vehicle, but if you are leaving the vehicle, you cannot leave it in your vehicle. You have to keep it on your person. If you are going to play football or something like that, then obviously you can't leave it on your vehicle, and you can't keep it in your football bag whilst you're on the field. So you are required to load it to the nearest police station. So it's a heavy responsibility. It's not something that you keep that you place in such a situation where it's in the reach of children, or in fact in the reach of anyone who is not licensed to carry that firearm.
In this instance, for instance, the property owner, he had the gun on his property. The kids were playing on his property, discovered the gun. According to one report, it was covered with some galvanized, so there was some degree of concealment, some effort to do that, according to the report. They found the gun. How culpable is he? What kind of trouble is he in that they entered his property? It is also reported that his kids were playing in the area too. So the kids found the firearm. How much trouble is he in is the question here.
He's in trouble for possession of a firearm. Once it is found on his property, same regime used for drugs. Once a firearm is found on your property, once you're in occupation of that property, and you are deemed to be the owner of the firearm. So possession of a firearm and ammunition, that would be the obvious charges. In terms of the murder, he's not liable because there are too many dots to connect evidentially. Mm-hmm. And I say evidentially and not evidently. Mm-hmm. You need a specific type of evidence, and you need to show that he knew the children may have had access to it. He knew they may have used it in a certain way. He had foresight that death or grievous bodily harm was virtually certain to occur. That is a long stretch to have him culpable for the death of the boy.
You may have more clarity than I do. The last information I have is that the gun was obtained illegally, because one police officer made the observation it was something got for good intent but ended up with bad results. To the best of your knowledge, your information, is it clear yet whether the gun was in fact there with him illegally, or was he in legal possession of it?
Whether you have it for good intent or bad intent, once you don't have a firearm user's license or a shotgun license, it was a shotgun. And shotgun licenses are easier to obtain. If you're going to hunt, you can get a hunting license and the shotgun license. From what I have heard, I'm going by what was put in the public domain. It was found close to some marijuana plants. So I don't know if he was cultivating, if it was marijuana plants simply sprung up because persons in the area smoke marijuana and probably truly sees and grew up. So if he is cultivating marijuana, that can be for good intentions.
Sure.
Irrespective of my views on the legalization of marijuana, but the good or bad intent makes no difference. If you have it illegally, you are still culpable, and if it was obtained legally, he would still be culpable in this situation because he didn't secure it.
Sharmain afforded me the opportunity, the courtesy of asking you the first couple of questions. Let me reciprocate, Sharmain.
Yes.
But let's take it now to the child who actually fired the shotgun. What is the law surrounding situations like these? Because I can't even ask you anything specific because it's such a kind of almost unprecedented in Trinidad. Not the incident, but in terms of our looking at the law surrounding situations like these. And I just want to add, because I usually ask these long questions, that for a while we've been hearing almost 10, 15, 20 years about these children being used as gun sacks in some hotspots and stuff. Children, because of their age, and they would not be targeted by police officers as young as 8 years old, carrying firearms for older people, for criminals. So can we talk about that then?
Let me deal with the last point first. If you have a young person transporting a firearm or drugs for an older person, and that younger person has not reached the age of criminal responsibility, which is very low in any event. The age of criminal responsibility is 8 years old. So if you have someone below the age of 8 who has not attained the age of 8, and he's carrying either drugs in a school bag or a gun in a school bag or lunch kit or whatever, then he is deemed in law an innocent agent. And the person who gave him the drugs or the firearm to carry would be the principal offender, and he would be liable for either for whichever offense, whether it's possession, firearm possession, ammunition, possession, drugs, whatever. The age of criminal responsibility, once you attain the age of 8 years old, you are capable of forming mens rea. But from 8 to 12, the prosecution must prove something additional apart from the actus reus and the mens rea. The actus reus being the guilty act, and the mens rea being the guilty state of mind. Prosecution must prove a mischievous propensity. After 12, once you attain the age of 12 onwards, they do not need to prove mischievous propensity. You are capable of forming mens rea just as an adult. In this case, all the participants, they were over the age of 8, they were 11, 12. If the principal offender, if he's 11 years old, in addition to proving that he fired the fatal shot, and with the requisite intent, which would either be, it would be foresight of virtual certainty that that would occur, and the jury can find once, and this will have to be gleaned from the statement he gives, or things he may have said, which may be given in evidence or statements by witnesses, that he was used to the effect that he had foresight that death or grievous bodily harm was virtually certain if he pointed the firearm and pulled the trigger. Once he has that appreciation, then murder. Or if he intended to kill or cause grievous bodily harm and he appreciated that was his intention, then it's murder.
It is one.
However, Oh, sorry.
Please go ahead.
Yes, if however, it was not done with the intention to kill or cause grievous bodily harm, but it was done simply with the intention to scare others, that you are delving into the realm of risk-taking, or what they call recklessness in criminal law. So the fact is he has an unlawful firearm, illegal firearm, and he's doing a dangerous act, an inherently dangerous act. So if he's taking a risk by shooting in the direction of the other boys, and there's a risk that the other boys may be injured, but it's not his intention to kill, then he would be guilty of manslaughter. That would be unlawful, dangerous act, manslaughter.
But I think what it seems clear to us, the father of the victim said he's forgiven them. They are kids who were playing a very dangerous game, albeit, but in this case it seems as though just kids playing with a gun, and that speaks to a whole different dimension of what is taken as fun, because allegedly the shooter said to the other kid, "Run." Our guest this morning is Wayne Sturge. He is criminal defense attorney. We're glad to have him here. It's 13 minutes after 10 o'clock. We're talking about the unfortunate incident that took place with with Ruben, the 11-year-old boy, and we're also looking at the bigger picture too, the question of guns. That comes into a question of how we handle guns, because we have so many guns, so many homicides that are connected with guns, and you wonder, well, we don't manufacture guns here. They come in here. It raises a whole question about policing. It raises a whole question about even those who legally seek to obtain a gun, and some of them will tell you they've had to wait 2, 3, 5 years before they hear of their application. Speak to that process for me, please. One, the attaining of guns legally, and two, what we have in place. Do you think it is sufficient to put a cap on to prohibit people from acquiring them illegally if the penalty is sufficient? Is what I'm asking.
I think the penalty is sufficient. The problem in this jurisdiction is if you don't process offenders fast enough, you don't the time between charge and conviction, if it's not fast enough, then it's not a sufficient deterrent. That's the first thing. The second thing in Trinidad and Tobago is people don't trust the police. So in most cases where you have an in possession firearm cases, usually it would be 2 police officers testifying. Mm-hmm. If it's at the High Court, 2 police officers testifying, jurors would generally disbelieve the police. That's the fault of the police. That's because of the way the police interact with the public. It's a public affairs issue. So if the police are not credible, you are not going to get firearm convictions in the High Court. If the prosecution recommends a summary trial for common sense, and the accused elects summary trial, there's a greater likelihood that he'll be convicted by a magistrate. Magistrates are not jurors. In terms of the conviction rate, it would be the opposite. It would be closer to 100%, whereas the acquittal rate with jurors would be closer to 100%. If you don't process persons fast enough and convict them or acquit them fast enough, the deterrent of 5 or 10 years imprisonment down the road, that doesn't bite. That's something in the distant future. Anything can happen in 10 years. Mm-hmm. In terms of acquiring a firearm, it really does take a long time, 3 to 5 years. That in itself, I'll tell you quite frankly, is a deterrent for persons who legitimately are in need of a firearm, and in some cases they acquire the firearm illegally and keep it in their homes. If they have been the victims of burglary or robberies at their homes and so on, businessmen and so on, and they cannot acquire it in a reasonable time, you'll be surprised that many legitimate persons, businessmen and so on, they have unlicensed firearms at their homes. Because the thing is, they genuinely need to protect themselves. So there is a need to speed up the process. We don't know why it takes so long. I can give you my own situation. Years ago, I applied in 2003, and the process of I have no convictions or criminal cases pending against me, so that's a prerequisite. They come to your home, they visit, they'll talk to your wife, ask if you're a violent person, if you beat her up, things like that. Once the police officer from the district investigates and he's satisfied, he'll forward it to the department in the police administration building. And that's where the wait takes place. It takes about 3 years from then. So that in itself is unfortunate because the investigative process takes weeks, probably months at most, a couple of months at most. So that needs to be fixed, the administrative bungling from the time the file is submitted to police headquarters, taking 3 years. That obviously needs to be fixed. In terms of the proliferation of illegal firearms in this country, you can bring how many OPVs you want. That wouldn't solve the problem. The previous government said you needed OPVs to stem the drug trade and so on. The most drugs passing through this country for the purposes of transshipment do not come via pirogue. So an OPV can stop a speedboat coming from Venezuela to bring drugs, but they are bringing drugs and guns. But those come in to dealers and they go straight up the Caribbean River or that's some place in Caracas or somewhere like that. That's a very different type of offender. The real drugs, if you look at the biggest drug busts that come out of this country, they would have passed through the port of Port of Spain, Point Lisa, and so on. Drugs that went to Virginia, the drugs that ended up in Portugal and Spain and the UK, they were all packed legitimately at the port of Point Lisa and shipped out. The guns that come in, there's a person before the court, I will not call his name, but his father was a very prominent businessman. He has since died. And when they busted his home at Zaltine, they found enough guns to fit a platoon. High-powered rifles, he's Muslim, I don't know if that makes a difference. High-powered rifles, handguns, and so on, and a real impressive assortment. And people are not looking in that direction. They're saying, in essence, we need to stem the flow of guns coming from Venezuela with higher pirogue and speedboats and so on. But the thing is, you have to look at our proximity to Venezuela. And we speak English, they don't. They are seeking to service English markets, England, the US, Canada, with guns and drugs and so on. And we are not alone in this problem. There's St. Vincent and a few other islands, English-speaking Caribbean islands. So if you're in close proximity, you are susceptible to this sort of transshipment.
Wayne Sturge is our guest this morning. It's 20 minutes after 10 o'clock. We thank him for joining us here on Brunch, Sharmain.
Wayne, we're talking about all of this, and it's pretty much a frightening picture, the reality on the ground, because we have so many guns, the population is not large, and children, shooting is part of the landscape, whether they get it on their video games or it's on the news every night. So that's why you see children who are in proper homes, as you would call it, there is a shooting action when boys play. They point their hands and all that. So it's almost a second instinct and to have that shooting action.
It's not new. It started since my uncle was telling me recently. He's in his 60s since the early days when this TV started beaming into
the Westerns,
Westerns and so on. So you grew up with this sort of thing. It's a bit more intense now with video games and so on. So there's a culture of violence, but it's not new. It's much more sustained.
Right.
That's the problem. But the difference is, in the 50s and 60s, you didn't have a proliferation of firearms.
Good, but given this situation then, are our laws adequate to deal with minors and guns? Are they serious enough? Because, what are the consequences? For the 11-year-old, you would have outlined it. There would be no consequences. He would spend the night being questioned in jail and be intimidated and scared and then let out and go to school and may end up being somewhat of a hero among some of his friends.
Well, it's not that easy. He'll spend the night, he may be charged. If he's below 8, he won't be, because he cannot, in law, be deemed to have the criminal responsibility. But once they have the evidence, if he's between 8 to 12, if there's evidence of mischievous propensity, he can be charged with either the murder or the manslaughter or shooting or possession. And if he's over 12 and over, he can be charged without the need to prove mischievous propensity. It's simply actus reus mens rea. And if he's convicted, depending on his age, he'll end up at YTC. The maximum he can get would be a term of imprisonment of 3 years, which would take him usually to 18 years, and then he's released. Unless it's murder, where he serves at the court's pleasure, which is the court can determine how long he stays in prison.
But do our laws need to be amended to deal with the reality of our situation? Or do we find other ways of dealing with this? And what are the other ways? Can you suggest?
The laws should be amended. I think you need to deal with mischievous propensity. You need to have that across the board. That's the first thing. But the thing is, you have to remember that we obviously need amendments because the law, which creates criminal responsibility from 8 years old, that law is almost 800 years old. We imported it from the United Kingdom when we were a colony. That has been the law in the United Kingdom for hundreds of years until 1933 with the passage of the Children's and Young Persons Act, and they raised the age of criminal responsibility. And it's now 10. You have to take into account that Trinidad and Tobago and Israel and 2 other African countries were the 4 countries with the lowest age of criminal responsibility in the world. So, and Israel, we can understand the reason for Israel. They have an issue with the Palestinians and young Palestinians using weapons and so on. So there's a need. Israel can argue that there's a need. In Trinidad and Tobago, regrettably, we are not very different. Our children, 8-year-olds, are not the type of 8-year-olds we had 20 years ago. As you said earlier, and I had clients who 12 to 18 years old, they actually shot and kill persons on behalf of others. And that's the reality in the ghetto. If you go into in Nelson Street, George Street, and so on, a lot of the offenders, gunmen, are 13, 14-year-olds. And it's not that they simply woke up one day and decided to start carrying around guns and shooting. They had access to these guns from 8, 9 years old. There's an appreciation, a very different appreciation in the ghetto, if you want to call it that. The children in the ghetto who are exposed to firearms and so on, their maturity is very different to the maturity of someone else who doesn't have that sort of exposure.
Wayne Sturge is our guest this morning. He's a criminal defense attorney. We're happy to have him. That is not something that's unique or idiosyncratic of the ghetto only, but the exposure to guns all over the world is a serious situation. And the Israel situation, which is a different talk show, that may be slingshots, but we will get there as a separate conversation. What have we had here? 407 homicides in 2013, 403 in 2014, a reduction of a mere 4. Everybody's still feeling that they are under siege. And that is something why I asked you the question earlier about the acquisition of guns, because though I am not a proponent, not even remotely, of the NRA, the National Rifle Association in the United States, many have argued that if folks getting guns legally were allowed to get them in a timely manner, then the perpetrators of crime would think twice before they can move in with impunity as they do right now. Is there anything to that? And that's the reason I ask you about the long waiting period for legitimate folks to get hold of a gun, because the criminal elements know they can move almost without any fear at targets that because it's difficult for them to get a gun. Do you see that in any way in the equation here as to balance off this criminal situation and the amount of deaths we have?
It will not cause a dent in terms of the amount of homicides, because the amount of homicides in Trinidad and Tobago, there are homicides committed at the level of the gangs. So one gang against the other. Mm-hmm. I do believe, however, and I've said for quite some time, that if you own property, you should be entitled to a firearm. And that's the position in the United States. You have a right to bear arms. You can have a shotgun at your home. if you want a license to carry a firearm, which is different to having it at your home, to roam the streets with a firearm,
yes,
then you need
permit.
Yes, you need a carrying permit, and that is what we should have here. A bandit should know that when he's going to burglarize a house, that he's not going to have free passage, that he might be met with a blast of a shotgun from the owner.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only way you give the owners leverage. You have to give the owner a fighting chance. If a man's home is a castle, if you're going to invade his home, you should be able to fight back. The bandit should not have the upper hand. And since we do not have systems in place where we can check the proliferation of firearms, then we should give the law-abiding citizen a fighting chance when someone comes into his home.
It is the reason I asked that, because if you can break in almost with impunity, knowing that there's going to be no retaliation because guns are so hard to come by, then you're more inclined, the criminal elements, of course, to do this. Should the decision for owning a firearm only be in the hands of the Commissioner of Police?
Well, there's a firearms appeal board. So
there's the appeal board, yes, but the initial issuance is in his hands solely.
Yes, it is, and I think it should be, because he has the resources to do the necessary investigations and so on. That's why it's in his hands.
The appeal board was set up in October 18, 2012. I don't know how many times they have met since then. Are you aware?
No. The appeal board existed for many years.
Mm-hmm.
The recent board was reappointed in 2012.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes,
mm-hmm.
The membership. But you see, the thing is, in Trinidad and Tobago, you have to keep in mind that the bulk of the firearm offences, they are drug-related, gang-related. So if you're hoping for a dent in the homicides, by terms of giving everyone guns, no.
I was not really looking so much for a dense Sturge. What I was more saying is that I want to kind of even the battleground, as it were, because a battleground it is. I want to even the playing field. But,
I agree.
And I don't feel that homeowners, that this feeling of dread and living in an environment of criminality can be reduced or tempered if folks felt they had the means at their disposal to defend themselves.
Well, the counter-argument is that we have violent by nature. Trinidadians are seen as, just as Jamaicans and Haitians, as violent by nature. So if you allow persons to have guns in your home, and you look at the level of domestic violence we have here, then you are making it easier for someone who is upset with his wife, or a wife upset with her husband, instead of a slap or slapping it out with a bill or something like that. You might just go and pick up the license firearm and blow a head off or something like that.
Case in point, Mr. Sturge, 16-year-old shoots a prison officer with his legally acquired firearm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I said this week that prison officers should be the last people to have firearms.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the environment they work in an environment, a violent, intense environment. When they get home, what do you expect? They cannot simply demarcate and say, well, I'm home now, so let me throw off that personality. You're a human being. So if you are dealing with violence all day and you come home, you are bound to have a short fuse for the simplest of things. You are going to explode. And the thing is, the Prison Officers Association, they continuously keep calling for firearms as if that's the panacea, if that would do something. They always say, look, our officers are under threat and so on and so on. And they seem to argue that it should be standard procedure. It shouldn't be, because the point is there are officers who claim that their lives are under threat. A threat assessment is made. They're given a firearm. When they're given the firearm, it's not that they go out and boast, well, I have a firearm now, and the threat no longer persists. The thing is, a lot of it is exaggerated. Because if you had this threat before, you are now issued the firearm, you don't go boasting about it. How come nobody shoots you? You don't hear about prison officers getting shot too often and to justify giving them a firearm. A lot of it, I can see, without fear of contradiction, would be exaggerated. And prison officers who legitimately need a firearm, these are prison firearms. These are prison officers. When you examine them, the one who was shot in the East a couple of years ago, 2013, this is a prison officer who's running a CPEP gang. This is a prison officer whose name had been called in trafficking with prisoners, who was engaged in relationships with prisoners, who had shown an inmate a porn movie he made with the inmate's girlfriend, who had beaten the inmate with a batter in his eye. The inmate almost lost his eye. I saw the photo. And then he shot dead. If you are a prison officer and you engage in trafficking with prisoners and you cut them up, the same way a prisoner will deal with a fellow drug dealer on the outside who cuts him up, he'll deal with you.
Wayne Sturge, of course, you know Mr. Saran Richards would disagree with you. He is saying he's saying that if the criminal elements knew, in fact, that the prison officers were armed, they would be less disposed to attacking them.
That's not quite true. There are many persons who were firearm owners and who have firearms, and they were killed. I don't want to name names too much. Ali Young, for instance, the owner of Albrosco, licensed firearm owner, they attempted a kidnapping, hesitated, and they shot him to death. There are a few others I can tell you about firearm owners. They have licensed firearms, but the thing is, once it gives you an opportunity to defend yourself, it is not necessarily a deterrent. Because most times when a bandit is coming, he's not coming and announcing, look, I'm coming to shoot you tonight, or look here, let us draw, as in the old days, I'm Clint Eastwood and you're the other one. They'll sneak up on you and you'll be caught unawares. So it simply gives you a fighting chance, but it doesn't necessarily act as a deterrent, and it's not a deterrent unless the bandit knows. And the thing is, if you have a licensed firearm, you're not supposed to tell anyone. So that argument, it withers.
10:33 on time. Our guest this morning, thank you for taking the time to be with us. Please continue, is Wayne Sturge, criminal defense attorney. We're talking about guns. Sharmain, can I go back to that issue of the kids on the internet?
No.
Okay. every time I do, I ask you these rhetorical questions and she goes, no.
Yeah.
In the instance we had last week, kids posing on the internet with guns.
Yeah.
Now, in a case like that, if they are able to locate the parties who put the guns in the hands of these kids, is there anything the law can do about it? And if so, what?
Innocent agency. If you have your child posing with a firearm on Facebook, the first thing, there's a cybercrime unit in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Once they can ascertain who's the owner of that Facebook account, who uploaded the photo and so on, that's where the investigation starts. If you can perhaps circulate the photo of the child to the Ministry of Education, let them circulate it to the teachers so the teacher can identify the child, and you have, it's easier in terms of the investigation. And once you locate the child, you are half the way in terms of identifying who may have been the owner, who would have given the gun to him, and then you charge that person depending on the age of the child.
And what would the charge be? Endangering the life of a minor? What would that be?
No, it's simply possession of a firearm. So you see, the thing is, the minor, if he's under 8 years old, he cannot have the requisite mens rea or state of mind to be in possession of a firearm. So the person who gives it to him, he has the responsibility. The law would deem him, and he would be the person charged.
When realistically speaking, we look at CSI, we look at all these television programs, and I think people are basically programmed to think that all police operations should be as smooth and as efficient as the ones that we see on television, especially the forensic part of it. What kind of forensics, practical, good, realistic forensic, as a criminal attorney, you would know? Like, what kind of evidence can they bring? Do we trace guns here? Do we do that at all? Because you see, they pick up a firearm, they say they find 20 spent shells, 2 live rounds at a murder scene, and we hear nothing about it afterwards. Are we equipped? Are they in a position to trace guns and do it as professionally as it ought to be done?
Yes, they are. I know of situations where they picked up or they took bullets out of corpses and at the forensic science center, and there's I can't remember the name, a tool mark impression at the base of the bullet, so that each tool mark impression is different. It's a signature for each gun. And they'll basically use microscopes and so on to map out the tool mark impression of a particular bullet, which will be matched to a particular gun. If they eventually, when they seize firearms, I don't know if it's done routinely, but I've seen in cases where they seize firearms and they were able to say, well, this firearm was, so there's the capability. But a lot of the times you have to remember that the police cannot act simply on the basis of forensic evidence alone. They must have information and other things to back it up, because you can't operate in a vacuum. That's the first thing. Second thing is, a lot of the times when you actually identify the perpetrator, who may be the perpetrator, he's already dead, he himself having been killed by a rival gang leader. So you don't see a lot of this coming to the fore too often, but we do have the forensic capabilities.
Wayne Sturge, again, it's always good to have you with us, and this morning is no exception. Thank you so much for the clarity and being totally candid with us and helping us along the way. Truly appreciate you taking the time this Sunday morning to be with us on Brunch.
Anytime, anytime, and Yvonne.
Sharmain, Yvonne is my cousin.
You're going to get in trouble for that.
you know, the thing is, when you called me, and you said the name registered was always Yvonne.
No, Yvonne is my cousin.
That is a cardinal sin that gentlemen understand you never make.
No, but it's a normal mix-up. It's a normal mix-up. Right? You have two journalists in one family. So, thank you very much. Thank you very much for clarifying all of this again with us. Thank you so much.
Have a great morning now. Thank you so much.